Rob McLeod began every morning by looking at his daughter's website. She had disappeared in August 2003, a spirited, beautiful young woman who was 19 at the time. This tragedy was a cruel ordeal for the missing girl's parents, but it turned out she was far from the only victim in the story of a dangerous criminal. Today, we want to tell the story of the innocent victims of an incredibly dangerous man who hid his cruelties behind his cooperation with law enforcement agencies. Casey McLeod was born in 1984 in the state of Colorado. Her parents' names were Rob and Lori McLeod. Having had a child during their marriage, they devoted all their warmth and care to their daughter. Until her adolescence, the girl grew up carefree, completely shielded from the dangers and difficulties of the modern world. However, this carefree life of Casey did not last long. Later, her parents divorced, and she lived with her mother from then on. Her father often communicated with her during this time. The girl was 4 years old then. She was a cheerful, happy, bright child. The boundless love and care of her mother and father led, as she grew older, to a spoiled, unruly character that manifested itself during puberty. In high school, the girl fell into bad company, began smoking, quarreled with her mother, and behaved inappropriately. It was a rebellious teenage spirit that was received extremely negatively by her mother. The woman was tired of arguing with her daughter. At some point, she couldn't take it anymore, packed her daughter's things, and moved with her to Arizona to let her live with her aunt for a while. Casey's new home was Phoenix. Here, her behavior normalized. The girl met Tobita Martin, with whom she got along well, and over time they became best friends. At this point, they were both 16 years old. From the first days of their friendship, the girls understood each other perfectly. They were very close, went to school together, worked together in a restaurant, and spent almost all their free time together. According to Tobita, her friend got into bad company after graduation. There, she became addicted to smoking and began bringing dubious characters home. When her best friend Tobita noticed this, she called her aunt, with whom Casey was living, and told her about the problems. She then informed her mother, who immediately got into her car and drove to her daughter's house. The contact between her and Tobita did not break off but became even stronger. Tobita was very worried about her friend, so they remained in constant contact and cared for each other, even when they were far apart. As it turned out, Casey had been smoking illegal substances for months. In her opinion, she was a victim of circumstances, unlike ordinary addicts. She believed that she would be able to get her problem under control. After living with her father for several months, she came to her senses and returned to her mother. It turned out that during the time Casey was being cared for by her father, her mother had met a new man named Scott and was with him. This man was charming, loving, and caring. Life seemed to be getting better, and they began to live together. She got a new job and had long since separated from her bad company, in which she had been addicted to drugs. But after some time, the lie was uncovered. The parents found illegal substances in the house, and there was a serious conflict between them and their daughter. Casey claimed that she was not taking drugs, but that they apparently came from her old stash. The now 19-year-old young woman was convincing in her words and even agreed to undergo a test, but her parents could no longer believe the young rebel with addiction problems. The mother and stepfather threatened their daughter with turning her over to the police. There was a heated argument, whereupon Casey grabbed her bicycle and rode off to an unknown destination and did not return for a long time. The mother was worried. She drove around searching for her daughter but could not find her. This time, however, she had not just run away without reason, but after a serious argument. She had had similar outbursts of anger and tantrums before, which greatly upset her parents, but she always came back quickly. This time, her mother's heart felt that something disturbing had happened. Casey's biological father, Rob, learned from his ex-wife that his daughter had disappeared. The man was very worried, as he also participated in the search for his daughter and just wanted her to come home as she had done before. However, 2 days had already passed, and Casey had still not returned. She didn't even show up for her shift at the diner where she worked. This finally worried the parents so much that Lori and Rob involved the police. Contrary to expectations, the police officers were not in a hurry to start searching for the missing woman. The police told the parents that they actually had no right to search for their daughter, that she was already 19 years old and could leave the house at will. She could do whatever she wanted and was not considered missing, according to the police. To file a missing person report, there must be suspicion that someone has committed a crime. The investigators believed that Casey was somewhere with friends and would return later, and they did not want to waste their resources on a troubled teenager. This police response left the family of the missing girl at a dead end. The only support the worried mother still had was her partner, Scott. It turned out that he had connections to law enforcement because the man was an FBI informant and helped catch criminals. When Lori talked to Scott about her daughter, he assured her that she would definitely be found. The man used his connections and actually helped Lori. The police finally began to investigate Casey's disappearance, and some clues were found, including the discovery that the missing Casey had returned to her mother's house after her disappearance when no one was there. This was confirmed by a necklace that had been left on the doorknob of her bedroom. She always carried it with her. She had disappeared and then suddenly reappeared. Later, the stepfather also spoke with neighbors, and one of them said she had seen the missing girl just a few days after her disappearance. The neighbor confirmed that she had seen her in the company of Casey herself, her boyfriend, and the sister of the boyfriend. During this time, Tobita, the best friend of the missing girl, also participated in the search. She called everyone who might know Casey, but no one had seen her. Tobita traveled to the city where Casey lived and participated in the search operation organized by the relatives of the missing girl. Then she set up a social media page for her friend to receive information about her. Tobita also shared flyers with pictures of her best friend that described her. The mother was so grateful to her new lover for his involvement and help in the search that she agreed to marry him, for he was her only hope and support in a difficult moment, and they began to live like a real family. The man continued to support Lori and kept her going. They made every possible effort to search for her. In this state, weeks and then months passed. It took over a year to realize that Casey had not really run away. Everyone was already sure that something much worse had happened to her. Tobita was sure that her friend had had an accident and was in trouble because otherwise she would have contacted her at the first opportunity. They had a close friendship and had never fallen out to the point where the relationship had broken down. Casey would not have ignored her. During this time, the mother of the missing girl also began to describe the worst scenarios that could have happened to her daughter. At this point, the father of the young, rebellious Casey and her best friend were frequently calling each other and analyzing various possibilities, and they began to wonder whether the key to Casey's disappearance might be closer to her home and family than previously assumed. They had their first suspicions. The questions that occupied Rob McLeod were where his daughter was, whether she was okay, and whether it made sense to wait for her at home. What the man did not know was that another father from Colorado named Howard Emery had exactly the same feelings. He lived near their city and had lost contact with his daughter in a similarly mysterious way, but much earlier than Casey disappeared. His daughter was named Len Emery and disappeared at the age of 24, only 7 months before Casey's disappearance. Howard went over the events in his head that had preceded the incidents. His daughter had been an excellent student. She had even managed to graduate from high school a year earlier than planned and went to college, where she stood out for her intellectual abilities. But then the young woman began to have difficulties. Her mother had health problems that prevented her from finishing college. Len had to take care of her mother and help her, so she dropped out of her studies. She also lost her promising job as a veterinary assistant, and her life went downhill. But at that time, nothing mattered to her except her mother's health. She dreamed of making her mother healthy again, and then planned to get her other problems under control, resume her studies, and find a new job. But life held new surprises for her. The compliant Len met an abusive boyfriend and fell completely under the influence of the manipulator. She married him. Her husband beat her, gave her no opportunity to communicate with her family, and kept her completely under control. According to the father, the daughter began to have psychological problems during this time due to this series of failures and manipulations by her husband. The woman believed she was nothing and could not achieve what she dreamed of. Her husband suppressed Len and reduced her self-esteem to a minimum. In the end, however, the woman found the strength and left the domestic tyrant. Her marriage broke up in 2002, but that didn't make things any easier. Len's father was worried that his daughter began a relationship with another bad guy, an ex-convict named Stephen Hawley. At the same time, Len became interested in caving. This became a mental outlet for her and an opportunity to find something new and change her life from scratch. On January 16, 2003, Len set off in her car from her parents' house on a trip. She wanted to go with her friends to Mexico to do speleology with a group of professionals. However, only 2 weeks passed, and Len's father received a call from the sheriff's office of Utah. The man was informed that his daughter's car had been found off the highways in a canyon. The car could be identified by the license plate, as the owner had a great fondness for Dalmatian dogs, which was also reflected in the unique inscription on the license plate. According to the police officer, most of his daughter's belongings were still in the car, Len's clothing and everything else, including equipment, but there was no trace of the woman. That seemed disturbing enough. The sheriff told Howard everything he could find out during the investigation of the scene. It looked as if Len had deliberately driven off the road and directly into the canyon. There were a series of boot prints and tire tracks from another vehicle. Everything indicated that the young caver had gotten out of her car and into another one. However, some of the tracks were trampled, as if some kind of struggle had taken place here. The sheriff suspected that something might have happened to the woman, as if she had been kidnapped. Howard rushed to the police station to report his daughter's disappearance near his home in Colorado. However, the man was also turned away, as they believed that his daughter was just having fun somewhere and would return home later. Therefore, the father was forced to conduct his own investigations. The man first checked the transaction history of the woman's bank card and collected all the other data he could find. Based on the payment records, he was able to reconstruct her route, where she had traveled in the weeks before the call from the police station. Howard was confused, as everything indicated that she was leading a double life. She had not traveled to Mexico, but had spent the 10 days before the call traveling around the western states. During this time, she had issued numerous forged checks and spent thousands of dollars using her father's credit card. This was completely uncharacteristic of Len. She was frugal and modest in her expenses, and the card had been given to her by her father for emergencies when she might need money. Therefore, the man was sure that she was either being blackmailed or intimidated through threats, or that the money from the card had been withdrawn by someone else. The daughter simply could not have done all this alone and spent so much money. Howard was able to access her email account during his investigation and found out that Len had sent several emails to her cousin a few days before her departure. There were hints of problems, but Len assured her cousin that she was protected by a certain Hannibal and that everything was okay. The father didn't understand at all who they were talking about. At that time, her boyfriend Stephen, whom the woman had met after separating from her abusive husband, was still in prison, where he was serving a sentence for illegal substance trafficking. The father visited Stephen in prison to talk to him. Perhaps he could give him some clues. The friend told him that Hannibal was the nickname of one of his acquaintances, and he was a very violent man. If Len got involved with him, she was in great danger. He immediately advised him to notify the police. Hannibal was a former cellmate of his. He could kill a person very quickly and easily, and he knew many people who would not hesitate to kill the woman on his behalf. However, the friend of the missing woman refused, despite the father's pleas, to reveal the identity of this mysterious Hannibal, as he feared for his life. The alarmed Howard then did not turn to the police, who ignored his statement, but to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He told the FBI agents everything he knew about Hannibal, but they didn't believe him either, as they thought everything was just made up. The father's concerns were once again ignored, and the FBI did not pursue the case of the missing 24-year-old woman. Both fathers continued their own investigations. The discovery of Hannibal's mysterious identity, however, gave these independent investigations new impetus. Later, it turned out that this mysterious stranger worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation and was married to Lori McLeod, the mother of the missing Casey. It turned out that Hannibal's real name was Scott Kimball. Even Lori herself had begun to suspect his involvement in her daughter's disappearance at that time. Her doubts emerged only much later after the wedding. From time to time, he made eerie jokes and said strange things that scared the woman, and she had questions for her new husband. Lori often had the feeling that something was wrong with her new husband. He gave confusing answers to all questions related to the missing daughter, and then the woman found Scott's work uniform and Casey's personal diary while searching his things, which should not have been in his possession. Amazingly, it took a whole 6 months before the ex-wife informed Rob McLeod that Casey had not only been missing for an entire weekend when she was last seen, but that Scott himself had left on the same days, which later led her to suspect his involvement in the possible crime. These were not the only events related to the man that worried those who knew him. At the beginning of 2006, he was involved in a criminal case being investigated in Lafayette, Colorado. The police first became aware of him when they were investigating a case of check fraud. Scott had connections to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as he was a criminal informant. Furthermore, it turned out that the man was a con artist who had spent most of his life in prisons in the western United States. However, it was not possible to catch Hannibal while he was on the run. A warrant would have been issued for the arrest of the suspected informant, but it took more than 2 months to track the man down. The arrest required participation in a massive chase that took place along the Coachella Valley in California. The criminal could finally be stopped and arrested. The experienced criminal, however, did not want to give up even when he was handcuffed. Unfortunately, the investigations into the involvement of the prisoner in several cases of the disappearance of young women did not begin immediately after the investigators' work. Another name was added to the list of missing persons in which the man might be involved. The name of the third missing person was Jennifer Markham. She had disappeared several years earlier from the view of family and friends. It also happened in Colorado. The 25-year-old Jennifer Markham was a single mother who earned her living as a dancer in a nightclub. She was waiting for her imprisoned boyfriend from places not too far away. His name was Steve Ennis. Shortly after this event, Jennifer also disappeared. Her father, Bob, did not understand what had happened to his daughter, but suspected that Jenny might have been in trouble or even behind bars. Only a year after the police report did her father receive a call from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, informing him that his daughter might be in trouble. She herself had not yet been found, but her car had been found abandoned at Denver Airport. The parents found out that the authorities had discovered the woman's car much earlier than they had been told. They continued to demand answers from the investigators, and then Jennifer's mother was given the opportunity to contact Scott Kimball. The informant said that the daughter of the Markhams had been killed by an illegal drug dealer who was involved with her boyfriend. He said the missing woman had been tied up and strangled. But the most frightening thing was the end of the conversation with Scott. He said he could take the mother of the murdered woman to the mountains the next day and show her where her body was. However, the parents of the missing woman did not accept this offer. They were afraid of him and literally believed that this would be their last journey. In any case, the father was certain at the end of the conversation that it was the informant who had killed his daughter, and that he wanted to get rid of them by suggesting they go into the mountains. And all because he spoke with a frighteningly threatening voice and told everything in such detail as if he had been there and seen everything with his own eyes. Jennifer's parents went to the police officers to express their suspicion, but no one wanted to listen to them because the investigators trusted Kimball, who had been working for them for a long time and had a certain level of trust. And this time, the parents had to take the investigation into Jennifer's disappearance into their own hands. The father ordered a small billboard with a photo of his daughter, which he set up near the nightclub where his daughter danced. In this way, they hoped to receive information, and it worked. In June 2006, Rob McLeod, the father of the missing Casey, happened to come across the story of Jennifer's father. He recognized his billboard and read it. The story of Jennifer's disappearance bore great resemblance to the story of his daughter's disappearance, so the man contacted him. In the course of the conversation, Rob McLeod learned some shocking facts. He heard the name of Scott Kimball, which had been mentioned by Jennifer's parents. Rob also suspected that Scott had something to do with Casey's disappearance, so they arranged a meeting to go over all the details and work together on the investigation. Later, they met the father of the missing Len Emery and also worked with him. Scott was also involved in their case. After that, Rob met with his ex-wife, Lori. He immediately asked her whether there had been other cases of strange behavior by her husband and mysterious disappearances of people during her time together with Scott. The woman quickly remembered that in 2004, Scott's uncle Terry Kimball had also disappeared. She also found that strange. After that, the families of the missing had a big trump card in their hands with which they could turn to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They reported to the office in Denver and shared their suspicions regarding the perpetrator, Scott Kimball. The relatives were sure that he was behind the disappearance of the women. Finally, the law enforcement officers listened to them and agreed that there were too many peculiarities in these cases, and all the threads led to Scott. So the agents reacted and began investigating instead of ignoring the whole series of disappearances. The investigations officially began only in the fall of 2006. In all these cases, the investigation revealed that Scott Kimball was driven by greed. The man wanted money, attention, and power. At that time, he was still in prison awaiting his trial for fraud. The investigators began talking to an informant from the Central Bureau of Investigation who was willing to show them the most sophisticated cat-and-mouse game they had encountered in their entire career. Scott lied constantly to confuse investigations. In one of his stories, he said that his uncle had fled to Mexico with a dancer after winning the lottery. When checking this information, the investigators found that he had not won anything and no payment had been made to him. They also found out that the uncle had some money before his disappearance. The uncle had earned some money after the divorce. The man constantly carried a briefcase with him containing several $1,000s that he had gotten his hands on. This seems to be the cause of his death. The second victim in chronological order was the dancer Jennifer Markham. She and Scott found out about each other when he was in the same cell as her boyfriend. It was in 2002. He saw pictures of the beauty and fell in love with her almost immediately. He began to assure his cellmate that he would like to help her find a normal, well-paying job, and the cellmate gave him the opportunity to help. But his real motive was to possess this woman entirely. At that time, Kimball convinced law enforcement that Jennifer and his cellmate were part of a criminal plan. He claimed to have uncovered a criminal gang involved in contract killings. Amazingly, the FBI agents believed the criminal. He was released in December 2002 and began working as an informant. Only 2 months later, Jennifer disappeared. During the investigation, the police officers spoke with Steve Ennis, who was Jennifer's boyfriend. He reported at the time that he suspected Scott and also believed that Scott was involved in the disappearance of the girlfriend of another ex-convict. His name was Steve Hawley, who was together with Len, and she had also disappeared. The investigators tried to contact her, but since 2003, this was no longer possible due to her disappearance. The investigators realized that she was another victim of Kimball. Len's photo was found on Scott Kimball's laptop. However, the law enforcement authorities had no bodies of the missing, no evidence, and no confession from the perpetrator himself. They continued to literally extract information from him, piece by piece. In April 2008, Scott finally gave a small clue. According to him, he was with a woman who died of an overdose of illegal substances in a national forest in Colorado. The police had a parking receipt indicating that Scott Kimball was in Walden, Colorado, near the national forest, on the weekend when Casey McLeod disappeared. It seems that he disposed of bodies in the area. The investigators then contacted the Forest Service and tried to find out whether bodies had been found there and whether they had received similar reports. The dispatcher replied that there had been no such incidents, except for what had happened in the winter. A skull had been found there. After investigation, it turned out to be Casey McLeod. However, no further remains could be found, and the cause of death could not be determined based on the skull alone. From that point on, Casey's disappearance was finally treated as a murder case, and Scott became the main suspect. Scott Kimball was born in 1976 in Boulder, Colorado, into a broken family, which made his childhood extremely turbulent. He survived his parents' divorce and even had his first encounter with the police as a teenager when he fired a gun through his neighbor's window. When Scott and his brother moved into their grandmother's house, the neighbor raped them both, leading to Scott's psychological problems. He even tried to take his own life and shot himself in the head at the age of 23, but he was lucky. The bullet only grazed his skull, and paramedics saved his life. At the beginning of his criminal career, Scott was involved in several petty crimes, including credit card fraud. In his private life, he was unlucky. Scott married Larissa Huns in 1993. The couple had 2 sons, but the marriage could not be saved due to constant quarrels and conflicts. They divorced in 1997. Scott believed that the whole world was against him, and this was, as psychiatrists later believed, the main reason for the murders. The ex-wife later accused Scott of stealing from and raping her, but she failed a lie detector test, and her accusations were considered invalid. Nevertheless, he was soon arrested and imprisoned for fraud. After escaping from prison, Scott returned to his ex-wife to rape her a second time, although the rape report was never filed. When Scott was arrested in Alaska, he stood trial in connection with his escape. During his detention in Alaska, Scott convinced the FBI that he would spy for them, so he got away with a light sentence. However, this deal was extremely reckless because after his release, Scott committed 4 heinous murders. Casey's mother, Lori, was shocked, for she had literally married the monster that had taken her daughter away from her and didn't even notice it for a long time. How could this man charm her with his charisma? But as everything came to a head, she divorced him. Lori believed that it was Scott who had planted illegal substances on the day she last saw her daughter, that he had started the argument because he knew that the impulsive Casey would leave the house and he would get a good opportunity to bring her to her senses. So far, however, the entire case was based on speculation. There was too little evidence against him, all of which could be dismissed as circumstantial and easily refuted with the help of a good lawyer. An extensive collection of evidence was required before the informant of the Federal Bureau of Investigation could be brought to trial. That changed in 2008 when Kimball was sentenced to 48 years in prison for his recent fraud and assault offenses. But the prosecutors wanted more. They wanted to hold him accountable for all the brutal murders he had been involved in. But that required more than just interrogations. So the law enforcement authorities offered the man a deal with a reduced sentence if he would lead the police officers to the bodies of his victims. Scott finally agreed, and in the winter of 2009, showed the locations in the canyons of eastern Utah where the remains of Kaisi and Jennifer could be found. A thorough search led the police officers to a single boulder lying in the canyon. Under the rock were found bones and a hairpin of a woman with a torn strand of hair. The forensic examination revealed that these were the remains of Kaisi, who had been lying on the lonely rock ledge for 6 years. Among the remains was also a bullet that was identical to one fired from Scott's weapon. The intruder then helped to discover the body of his uncle in this canyon, who had also been shot. However, there was a problem in searching for Jennifer's remains. The investigators searched the entire area indicated by Scott, but found nothing. It turned out that the perpetrator's story about the whereabouts of Jennifer Markham's body was entirely fabricated. Scott wanted to convince the police that he was not lying and telling the truth about Jennifer Markham's burial, and even went so far as to undergo a lie detector test. He suspected that her body had been found by someone and re-hidden. However, the investigators believed that he deliberately prevented them from finding Jennifer's body because he had a special connection to her. In any case, in October 2009, the families of the killer's victims gathered in court. Finally, they could see the Hannibal who had taken their daughters' lives from the front row. The parents of the murdered testified and complained to Scott that he had ruined their lives. Scott Kimball was charged with second-degree murder. As part of a deal, he pleaded guilty to being involved in the murders of 4 people. He was sentenced to 70 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole in 2082. In his case, he will probably spend the rest of his life behind bars. In his speech, the perpetrator emphasized that he was not a serial killer. Scott admitted that he had only killed his uncle Terry and was only indirectly involved in the death of the women. He spoke in riddles about his female victims and did not explain what it all meant. The defendant referred to them as part of a mechanism, but did not reveal what exactly it was and how it worked. It was clearly some kind of criminal plan. The circumstances suggested that they had died of an overdose, but there were great doubts about that. Scott had even said that he had help but refused to reveal which other people were involved in the events. What the prosecutor had not anticipated was that the reason for this was simple. They simply did not exist. According to forensic psychiatrists, the man had killed the women due to an unhealthy sexual attraction. For this reason, it was difficult for him to talk about it, and he also did not consider it murder. The search for Jennifer Markham's body continued even after Scott's conviction. However, her body was never found. The sons of Scott Kimball gave an interview and openly revealed that their father tried to kill one of his sons, Justin, when he was 10 years old. His father hit him on the head with a metal object, and he lost consciousness. Then he drove him to the hospital and tried to throw him out of the car at full speed. The boy suffered severe injuries and was placed in an artificial coma, which he miraculously survived. When Justin came to and told the story, no one believed him. The now adult son realized that his father wanted a payout from his life insurance, or $50,000 from the boy's insurance policy. He was the sole beneficiary. Scott Kimball is suspected of being involved in several other women's murders that were committed in Colorado at that time. According to the police, he may have killed 25 people. The bodies of some of the victims were found with a series of knots on a rope that resemble the knots Kimball used in the murder of his Uncle Terry. One of the women was wrapped in a baby blanket identified by Scott's son. Thus, the investigators are confident that there were many more victims. Thank you for watching and take care of yourself.